last time the Ducati 748 SP was on the channel, we did have some issues.
That's great when you're tinkering. It's fucking rubbish when it's boiling hot. It don't fucking work.
The good news is, despite the initial starting issues, I did manage to get to the chip shop and met up with Spence for a little ride out. Unfortunately, I did have some doubts about how consistent the starting was going to be on the bike, so we really needed to get it back in the workshop and start taking it apart. Guys and girls, it has been a while since we last had the 748 on the channel. Probably a couple of months ago now, back in the summer. And for those of you that watched that video where me and Spence went for a little afternoon ride out, had a little problem when I left the house where it was struggling to start. And I'll try and get it on camera today, but what I recall doing was when I turned the key on, I heard the fuel pump prime, but it sounded really lazy. So on, off, and eventually it picked up. It did start great, took it out the front, and then unfortunately the pump kicked in, but it didn't start again, which I suspect is the starter solenoid, which is down here by the battery. So we're going to have a look at that today, but we're also going to take the fuel tank off, drain the fuel out, and have a look at the fuel lines, because I'm seeing more and more on the owners group that I'm on, people are starting to get corrosion on the lines, even with the 5% ethanol in the fuel. Obviously back in the mid-90s when these were released, it wasn't something they had to worry about, but yeah, technology has changed, unfortunately, not always for the best. So let's strip it apart and see what the fuel tank looks like inside. That's no priming at all from the fuel pump, unfortunately. Oh, maybe a little bit. Starting to kick in there a little bit. I think you might be able to hear it. Cool, that doesn't sound good, does it? All right, so regardless of the solenoid, something's definitely not right with the fuel pump, so that's getting taken off now. Now, just in case you weren't aware of what a fuel pump sounds like running, let's do it on the R1 if you have a listen. Hear that prime there? Now granted, the Ducati one isn't as loud as the R1M1, but you could always hear it, which again, I can hear it very lightly, it's just, yeah, definitely not right. So we're gonna have to lift the rear seat up, lift the tank up, it's got all the fuel pump in there, and hopefully it's something straightforward, like just a dead pump, which also could potentially be some corroded fuel line, but let's have a look. Even though my Ducati 748 SP is a 1995 model, it does come with very early generation fuel injection, which means we have a pump. What we do need to do is remove the tank to gain access to it, because essentially all the pump, filter are all accessed through the bottom of the fuel tank. In all the years that I've been working on motorcycles, I've never once had a dedicated drain plug for the fuel tank. Let me know in the comments what other bikes come with this awesome feature. I got the drain tub out ready for fuel to go absolutely everywhere as the pump came out, but much to my surprise, there was a proper drain plug there. Alternatively, the other option is you could use a pump or a siphon to remove the fuel from the tank, but where's the fun in that? That's the fuel tank drained. As a few of you may have seen, there was a little drain, just a little Allen key that you could undo. Oh, but it's still coming out of the pump there, allowing for me to completely drain the tank without doing that whilst trying to get the filter out. So yeah, top work, Ducati. Yeah, it's the first time in all the years working on bikes I've actually seen a proper drain in the tank.
The fuel pump assembly is held into the bottom of the tank with 3 Allen key screws. Once they're removed, you'll notice that the tank is a really tight fit to the pump. It doesn't just fall out. Again, it's got to contain fuel, so it can't have a loose fit. But the beauty again of what Ducati have done is they've created 3 holes that are threaded. And what that means is you can take the screws from the original fixings and bolt these in to the 3 threaded parts, and it'll essentially pull the tank out, so you don't have to use a lever bar or anything like that to risk scratching the tank. Again, something that's just really well thought out that you don't see on a lot of bike nowadays.
Look at these hoses. Oh, they're just literally, oh dear.
As I knew it could potentially be a few days, even weeks before I got replacement parts for the new pump, I figured I'd probably treat the inside of the tank to some ACF 50 just to avoid any corrosion, as the tank essentially would not be protected during that time.
As you saw there, the pump is now out. These are the breather lines that go up by the filler cap, and they are just absolutely, they're literally plying in my hands apart. Like, look at that. Oh. Thankfully, the ones on the actual fuel pump and that aren't as bad. They are really perished. There's a lot of little cracks in them and stuff. As you saw, I just fogged to the inside of the tank with ACF 50 to hopefully prevent any corrosion, as it's going to be left like that for a little while now. But yeah, let's start taking apart the pump and having a look what's going on there.
Disassembling the fuel pump I think is pretty straightforward, to be honest with you, as you'll see from this video, but it is worth just taking a couple of pictures if you need to remember for orientation if you put it all back, say in a few weeks, months, maybe even years time, like a lot of projects I have, I'm afraid. But in this case, again, really simple, everything fell apart nicely, nothing was seized or stuck, which made life much easier.
A quick run through then on the assembly. So it looks like we've got a Walbra fuel pump in there, well-known brand. I don't know whether it's original, I would have assumed so, but let me know in the comments. There's like a jacket or an adapter that lets it go into the cradle. We've got the 12-volt supply for the pump, which goes back through to the plug. We've got a strainer, which doesn't actually look too bad at all. You can see there's also a little strainer on the bottom there as well. And then we've got the fuel filter as well, which it goes from the pump through the filter and then into the line on the bike. But I mean, look at this. It's literally just, wow. Yeah, just like those that watched the RSV video, we are going to need to upgrade them then to be ethanol proof. A few days have passed and the goodies have started to arrive for the rebuild of the fuel tank pump assembly. So essentially we've got a brand new Walbro pump, which looks like is what was in the original, obviously a very old unit now, hopefully you can see that. Walbro, just search the part number. I think that came in at about £70. We've got a new KL145 filter, which is what was in there already. Let's zoom in on that. No, not going to see it with the reflection. New fuel tank O-ring and submersible fuel hose. Dear stuff, because as we can see from the old ones, even with the small amount of ethanol on the V-Power at 5%, which is the minimum amount of ethanol we can get in our fuels in the UK, it's just eating stuff. And what that means is it's ethanol resistant on the inside and the outside. So this shouldn't happen again. And then the only other thing we've got is a set of NGK plugs, and the reason I've gone with these, after the last video where I complained that when the bike was getting hot I was getting this occasional stutter, like slight misfire, 2 people actually messaged me and said try getting rid of the original Ducati Champion plugs and fit in the NGKs, as that seemed to fit it. So hopefully that will be all issues gone, and yeah, let's clean all the bits up that we're going to reuse and start fitting the new bits up.
I ended up using a toothbrush and some brake and clutch cleaner to give everything a good clean. Now I didn't want to use anything too aggressive and mark the pump base, because obviously it is going to have a seal put back on it, so we certainly don't want to damage anything. And as hopefully you can see here, it actually came up really nicely. But I am pleased to say that because every year when I don't use the bike, I leave a full tank of fuel in it, this does stop any corrosion rust appearing in the tank and around the pump. And again, this is the first time I've ever seen inside this. In all the years I've owned the bike, I've never taken the fuel pump out. Another great one for Ducati, the fuel filter housing is really nice. Just a 4mm Allen key, undo the nut, and then you can slide the filter out. And now in this case, I've just gone for exactly the same one that was in there. I personally can't see the need to upgrade it, so we've just gone with the same part number on the replacement. And this is what we came here for, ladies and gentlemen, the fuel pipe and pump replacement. And honestly, the state of those hoses, I'd seen some pictures online, but yeah, I'm surprised the bike even ran, to be honest with you, because they were just in such a poor state when I removed them. But pleased to report, I bought some ethanol rated fuel that's submersible, so the outside is protected against the ethanol that we've got, even in our premium octane fuels now. Thankfully, I was able to pick up a replacement Walbro pump online. You can buy these directly from Ducati, but to be honest with you, from what I can see, you're just going to double the price for the box. As ultimately, Walbro make the pump for the 748. It just made sense to get it directly from Walbro, and thankfully it arrived in 2 days, so certainly much faster than try to get it from my local Ducati dealer, driving there, picking it up, etc. But it does look so much better than the old tired one, even on the externals. Just like the fuel pump, you could buy the filter directly from Ducati, but I can't see why you'd want to pay over the odds for it when it's a manufacturer that makes them for Ducati, and these can be purchased easily online that will do exactly the same thing and came out, I'm almost certain, exactly the same factory. The next step is simply to put the new fuel filter and the bracket onto the fuel pump assembly and install those much needed new fuel lines that are now going to hopefully be resistant for ethanol for many, many more years. Much better. Now it looks worthy of going back into the tank. But before I can do that, I need to also do the lines for either side of the fuel filter, which I assume are some sort of vacuum or pressure line to stabilise the tank during use. But again, these do need to be ethanol rated as they're going to be submerged in the fuel as well. Night and day difference between the old hoses. Good news is, with this being ethanol resistant now, hopefully this won't be a problem again anytime soon. But I do make a bit of a mistake, as we'll see shortly, bolting these up to the fuel pump assembly housing now. I've removed the screws from the base plate so that they can go back into the original 3 holes, and we can finally throw all the old stuff in the bin. But unfortunately, I've not ordered enough hose to complete the other line, so we're going to have to move on to another job.
Whilst we wait for this little bit of pipe to turn up so we can finish the fuel pump assembly, let's go back to the bike and change these spark plugs. Now, whilst you're here, these lines that go into the pump, check these O-rings. Those that are familiar with the channel, watch the older series of the Ducati, I ended up having a slight nick in one of these, and when I turned on the pump, it just flooded everything with petrol. So they're not your normal O-rings, they have to be petrol resistant. I can't remember the name of them now, but I bought them from an authorised Ducati dealer. But while we've got the tank off, we're going to change the spark plug on the top cylinder, which we'll just pull out shortly. And then we've got one that's just on the front. I can't remember if I can take this off without taking the side fairing off. Got a horrible feeling all the belly's got to come apart to get that one back off to get to the top cylinder. But yeah, let's pull the plug out and get them switched over while the tank's off.
Pleased to report the old spark plug really did look in good condition. Certainly no concerns removing it, which is always a good sign. And to refit, pretty much the same as the removal, except on the way back in you are going to need a torque wrench and 20 Newton meters set to make sure they are correctly tightened. Yep, I did need to remove the belly fairing to be able to remove that middle trim. Should have really put the bike on the bench at this point because I'm getting way too old to be bent over trying to get to the front cylinder on the floor. But the good news is it's really not a bad job with the Ducati, as again I've mentioned in previous videos, the way the fairings come off of this, especially for the age, are just fantastic. Pleased to report that just like the upper top cylinder, the lower cylinder spark plug is in excellent condition as well. So no signs really indicating that there's ever been any poor running. But as I mentioned in the previous video, it was just a very slight hiccup miss, not really a big misfire. So I am really confident, well, I'm hoping even, that this spark plug replacement is going to fix that issue I got when the bike got hot.
As we're at this stage now, left fairing off, as you've seen, I've taken the right side fairing off. I'm going to have a look at the starter solenoid, which, if we, again, excuse the angle, it is, oh there, that is the starter solenoid. So we need to disconnect the negative. I'm not really going to be able to get the camera down here to show you a lot of it, and then take it off and clean the connections up. And if that doesn't fix it, it's obviously an internal issue, but I know from what I've read on the forums, brilliant source of information for these things, because so many people have had problems now, that there's a little white plug on the back that can work its way loose, get corroded and cause a poor connection. So we'll take that off, have a look. Obviously it's not doing it all the time, so it's going to be very difficult to confirm 100% if it fixes it, but as we're at this stage, we'll take it off anyway.
You can see the little white plug here, and it literally fell off as I pulled the starter solenoid out of the way. So I've now cable tied that in place so it shouldn't move anywhere, and then it's just a case of putting everything back together. And as I mentioned and banged on about before, really straightforward job on the Ducatis, because the way the fairings all go back on with the Zeus fasteners, it's literally a couple of minutes. The new hose turns up, which allows me to finish off the fuel pump and tank assembly. As you'll see here, I do, again, as we're going to see shortly, make a slight mistake with attaching these two side hoses before fitting them to the tank, because it is impossible to get them done up from inside. Whilst I was waiting for the parts to arrive, I had coated the inside of the tank with ACF 50, so we needed to try and get all of that out, otherwise she's going to be a little bit smoky on start up, and to be honest with you, I think I've got about 95% of it out, so I wouldn't be surprised if she makes a bit of a puff in the garage when we first get it going and fill it up with fuel. But I'd rather that than have the tank rot from the inside, so again, relying on my trusty brake and clutch cleaner, degrease the inside of the tank as best as I can through the fuel pump opening. Armed with some 2-stroke oil and a new Ducati gasket O-ring for the fuel pump assembly into the tank, I begin oiling everything up, and then it's simply a case of sliding the pump into place. But whilst doing this, I do need to reattach those two lines to where the fuel filler cap is from inside the tank, which unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, soon realise is impossible. And what I actually need to do is take those hoses, take them onto the tank first, and then once they're on the tank, I can then put the pump assembly in and then tighten them onto the pump. Hopefully that makes sense, but yeah, a real chore to do when you've already tightened everything up. Just one of those things, unfortunately. With those hoses now attached correctly either side, we can move on to installing the pump into the tank. And I must stress, you do need to be really careful at this stage, because if you pinch or rip that green O-ring gasket for the fuel tank, you're going to have to buy yourself another one, and it is incredibly tight. So what I do is a quick test fit first to see how it looks, and then again, thanks to the powers of the forums, people advise using longer bolts, because the standard ones aren't long enough, to then wind in the pump assembly, so you don't have to sort of force it at an off angle. You can slowly wind it all nicely and square, and then once it's fitted, it won't just pop back out, so you can undo those 3 slightly longer screws and refit the original, giving you a perfect fit that's hopefully going to be leak free. The longer bolts that were used to pull the fuel pump assembly down can now be removed and discarded, and these were just something I had lying around the workshop. You do need to be careful that they're not too long, because you don't want to go through the caps in the end of the threads. But with that done, we can then finally move on to the drain plug, and this is just sealed with a copper washer, and I've tightened this up with the torque wrench just to make sure everything is absolutely as perfect as it can be, because as I've mentioned before, we certainly don't want any fuel leaks, especially when the fuel tank drain plug is right above the top cylinder. And that's it. The fuel pump assembly is back inside the tank. I treat it to a quick degrease because it never really gets cleaned under there. And as you might be wondering, or as observed earlier on, the underside of the fuel tank is actually the airbox lid. And this is a modification that I've had on other bikes where people have retro done it, but Ducati did it out of the factory. And what that allows for is one hell of an intake noise. Again, I'll leave the video I did many years ago of the review on the bike on the road, and the intake sound when it hits about 8,000 RPM, it just sounds absolutely lovely as those throttle bodies sing away. As you saw briefly in the clip a moment ago, I've put a little bit more two-stroke oil on the O-rings that go back into the fuel tank. Again, this, if it does end up in the tank, is not a problem. You're going to get a little bit of smoke, a tiny bit of smoke on start-up. But what it ensures is the O-rings slide on nicely and don't get pinched, which I've had happen before. With that done though, the connectors can go back in, the fuel line's in, the drain line's in, and you're ready to go. Unfortunately, you can't see a lot here because my back's covering the refit of the tank, but it is pretty straightforward. The seat unit simply locks back into place and we're done. But I am going to need to remove the R1M from being sat behind those exhaust pipes because the last thing I want is crap being flown onto that and the heat on the carbon fibre nose cone. So, yep, we will the R1M out the way, ready for that first fire up. So we're going to pour a litre in first, cradle the can, so make sure we've got no leaks before we brim it. Good sign, nothing puddling around the bottom yet. Hopefully not at all. Right, let's brim it up. So this is going to be the first key turn on camera. So I imagine there'll be some funny noises as it removes the air. Oh yeah, sounds better. See if it starts then. That's a wrap on Project 748 today. Let's hope that's fixed the issue. I mean, it certainly didn't look clever and she did fire on the button. So all good news. It also seemed to be running really well. Hopefully you can see in the clip there, it was just super smooth. Came off of the fast idle switch on the lever and yes, I don't think it's ever sounded that good. So maybe the plugs were at fault. Who knows? But yeah, I hope you guys and girls enjoyed the video. If so, make sure you hit that like button, consider subscribing. I guess why we're here, because I know a lot of you have been asking for it. It is on the ramp. This is a bit, I guess, bonus footage. You'll see more of this when it comes to the next episode of this. But the stickers are off. It's been toffee wheeled. The rear unit has all been bonded up to the side pods. This is sort of halfway bonded in because it's still got to get to the screws underneath there. But yeah, I mean, look, I haven't forgotten about it. I just have been struggling for motivation because I know this needs a lot of work and a big push to get it to the next stage. But don't worry, it's still getting done.